Hello, dental people. Today we're going to talk about a subject that often intimidates assistants because they've never done it before, and actually intimidates a fair number of doctors too, which is dealing with the implant prosthetics, delivering implant crowns, drying in implant crowns and bridges. There's no doubt that it's an area that needs a certain knowledge base of parts and techniques, and some patience and finesse as you're putting these things in. But it's not really hard. It's certainly not. It's not harder than placing crowns on natural teeth. In some ways, it's easier because you know for sure that the crown is going to fit the abutment, whereas you don't necessarily know that the crown is going to fit the tooth. That's one of the uncertainties you have. If you're making a conventional crown and you've taken an impression of the tooth, when you go to try in the crown, after you've checked the contacts and the occlusion and things are still not working quite right, there's always the possibility that the impression was distorted, or that the model that the laboratory made was distorted. So you always wonder, geez, is this truly fitting the tooth or not, or is this something that I'm doing wrong? With an implant crown, in most cases, the laboratory is working on the actual abutment. They've got the metal abutment, and the crown fits that abutment, and we know it fits because that's the real abutment and that's the real crown. Whereas in a natural tooth, they can't hold the actual tooth in their hand, they're looking at a model of the tooth. So you know that part of it is secure. The trick is working on all of the little tiny parts and getting them fit in the right orientation. So we're going to go over a typical single tooth implant crown, and I'm going to show you how to use the little drivers and torque wrenches and all the specialized equipment that you're going to need to do that. So let's turn to our actual model. Alright, so let's start. This is what you typically get back from the lab. You have a model which has this in it, which you know from your terminology sheet is called the Implant Analog. And that's a replica of the implant in hopefully the exact position that the implant is in the patient's mouth. So it shows where the implant is in relationship to the teeth. So the laboratory is able to work on this model as though they have the patient and the implant right there in their laboratory. From that, they have a couple of parts that they've made. Now we're going to zoom in on this later, but just to kind of show you in general, this is called the abutment, and it is like the prepared tooth, and it fits into the implant. The implant systems that we use some kind of hex alignment mechanism. This particular implant uses an internal hex alignment, meaning that if you looked at the implant, you'll see, I don't know, can you see that, Danielle?
I can see it.
You can see there's a hole on the inside of the implant. There's a six-sided, which is what a hex means, like the negative of a nut on the inside there. The abutment then has the nut on the bottom surface, just like a regular hex nut that you'd bolt your bicycle together with. That allows the abutment to go in only one of 6 positions. So as you're trying this in, if you rotate it around, it will fit down there. If I take it out and rotate it, it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit, until I get 1/6 of the way around again. And where are we? Having a little trouble with this. Let me use my fingers, that always works. And there we are. It fits in that position. So you have 6 possible ways of doing this wrong. So rather than just, as you're fitting this in the patient's mouth, rather than randomly guessing what you're going to do, there's 2 ways to determine which is the right way. And practicing on the patient's model before the patient gets in the chair is always your best bet, because then you've rehearsed it and you know how the particular abutment for that patient looks. But one way to do it is to place the, I don't know, can you see both halves of this, Danielle? You can take the crown and put the abutment into the crown, and you see it doesn't fit like that, doesn't fit like that. it will finally fit. Let's see, that's almost there. Where are we? There. See how that goes in nice and flush. And this is what I meant before by saying that unlike a crown on a natural tooth, you always are sure that the crown is going to fit the abutment because they've had the actual abutment to work with. So if that's the way the abutment goes, and you know that this is the buccal of the tooth, then you can use that as your guide for how that abutment goes. So you carefully take it out, and you say, okay, there's the buccal of my tooth. Now what does the buccal of that abutment look like? And, well, the laboratory has helped you out here by placing a little B on the buccal. And that's the way it should be. If the laboratory has forgotten to do that, before the patient sits in a chair or while you're messing around with it before you put it in the patient's mouth, make a little mark with a high speed or the low speed. Just mark it. It's not going to hurt anything. But you need to know positively where the buccal of that crown will go. So now we see that buccal. We know that when we put this in the patient's mouth, that should fit there, and it does. Okay, so far we have the implant analog, we've got the abutment. We also have the screw. The screw connects the abutment to the implant. To put that screw in, we'll use this prosthetic kit, which is pretty much the only thing that we use. This is the BioHorizons kit. It can be used for other implants, not just BioHorizons. And it has a couple of parts that are pretty universal. One is a torque wrench. Torque wrench is an unusual thing that has a brake in it. I'll show you how that works. It also has this very clever, I'm not quite sure what they call it, but it's something which allows you to screw things in without putting your fingers in the patient's mouth. And it also has hex drivers. A hex driver is just like a hex wrench that you'll use for chores around the house. It's kind of like a screwdriver or a flat Phillips, but it too has 6 sides, and it's meant to fit into the screw that is holding the abutment into the implant. So if you were able to, you could screw it down with your fingers. If it is far back in the patient's mouth and it's not comfortable, use this extender. This extender allows you to place this in. There's a little rubber gasket which keeps it secure, and it's important that it be secure because one of the biggest dangers of doing any kind of implant work in patients' mouths is that these little pieces get dropped down their throat or into their lungs. So you always need to be very secure with how you're protecting these parts. So this allows you to put this in without having a lot of stuff in their mouths. So if I put this in, can you see the end of this, Danielle?
Move it forward, yeah. There you go. You're good.
Okay, so I can turn it here, and by turning it here, it goes through the gears and turns it here. So I can screw it down using this little hex driver. And that's the way it goes. Now, for some reason that was not screwing that. Why is that? Oh. Okay, which brings another good point. As you're doing these things, it is critical that this be properly engaged into the hex of the screw, just like you got the abutment engaged into the hex of the implant or analog. So when I tried to screw that in, it wasn't engaged, it was just spinning around. If you do that carelessly, it'll strip it. So make sure it feels secure, either when you're doing it with your fingers or if I was doing it using this device. I want to just put a little pressure on that, feel that it's down, and now it really is screwing it down now. Okay. So that screws it down, and then of course the crown fits on top of this whole deal. Alright, now let's talk about the actual sequence, now that you know the different parts. Let's pause that for 1 second, Danielle.